Hello, and thanks for watching this Cloud9 ERP Solutions video and subscribing to our YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to show you how to track profitability by product class, by item class. So many times you want to know what lines are making money, which lines are not making money. And in Acumatica, we can show you how to create a report that will allow you to see that. So to determine how to build a report like this, the first thing we need to know is, where is the data coming from? Where do we put the data in? Or where is the data at least visible? So when we take a look at sales orders, for example, and we open one up, this is not a complex sales order, but when we're looking at this, we can see we have, in the details section, we have the item, we have the quantity that's sold on this order, we have the price, we have the cost, we can look at our extended price, and this also shows us the date, so we know when things have been sold. And where this data comes from is in the sales order, but specifically this is a table. There's a table of information. There's a table for the summary here, database table. There's a table for the line information here, because this is a one-to-many, right? So you have one sales order, but you have many different line items, potentially, for each sales order. So what we want is all of the line items across all the sales orders. And how do we get that? So what we can do in Acumatica, if you are the customization role, you can hold down the Control and Alternate and hover over any column, and it'll give you information about where that data is coming from. You can hover over an individual field as well, but if you're looking for data down here, you hover over the column. So let's start off with the inventory ID, because that's very consistent. So Acumatica tells us the element properties of that column. So we know that it's a grid column. That really doesn't help us here. But we know that the data class is SO line. So sales order line. So all the lines from sales orders throughout the system have data in them. And we don't know for sure, but we can argue that maybe some of these other columns also are simply different columns, different fields in the same table. So when we look at this, we see sales order line and we see inventory ID. Great. That's a start. If we scroll over and look at maybe our quantity, we can see the same table, but a different column name, order quantity. That's great too. If we scroll over to our price, we also have it there. It's called curry unit price is the field name. And our extended price, our cost, is here as well. So this gives us the basics to get started. Now you could leave the screen open and start in a different screen. But what we want to do now is go into a screen called Generic Inquiry. And we want to start to create an inquiry screen to gather this data together. Later we can do a lot of things with it, but first we got to get the data. So what we want to call this maybe is sales order history. Now, keep in mind that we are looking at the sales order history. But if we go back to our sales order workspace, note the flow here. These are many different considerations when you're gathering this data. The flow is from an order to a shipment to an invoice. So do we want to know about this data at the order level because it's on an order? Or do we want to know about it at the invoice level? At the invoice level, we may be pulling it from different tables. In this case, we're going to do it on the order level, but your future project, you may be pulling from the invoice, which means go out to the invoice, do the same thing we did, look for the data table, and then you'll use that as a premise to gather this data. But for now, we're going to do it based on the SO line table. So back in the inquiry, we gave it a title, and you have some options here. You can make this visible in the user interface. So that means it'll show up in different sitemaps. So we can do that. We can go in here and say, give it a more of a proper description or title. We could decide what workspace we want it to be in. Maybe we want it to be in the sales order area. So we'll change that to sales order. And where do we want it? What category? Well, inquiries make sense to us. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add a table. So we'll hit the plus button here, and we know that we're looking, we could do a lookup, but we know that we're looking for SO line. So there's a lot of them here. So what you could do is you can go into the next and keep looking until you find that SO line object. Now keep in mind, Acumatica categorizes this accordingly. So you got your PX objects, and then SO is sales orders, but there are different areas in the system. So this is, for example, GL. So you got different areas, and you'll understand this as you start to dig in. So we have our sales order line. So let's save that. And there's a lot we can do. We're going to come back to this. We only have one table, so there's no relations. Relations allow us to relate different tables together. And we don't really care about parameters and conditions. We'll come back to and look at these things. But for the results grid, we're going to go in and add our different columns that we want to see. So the first thing we do is we select the object. Now the object in this case is SO line. That's the database table. We only have one because we only added one table. The data field is what we talked about on the previous screen when we looked at the sales order. So the first thing we wanted was the inventory ID. You can type here and actually select it that way, make it easier. Now, there's a lot of different types of columns here of information, but let's get started with this. We can also give it a caption. So if we don't like inventory ID, we can say item. And then let's go down to the next line. Next line would be perhaps the description, but we don't necessarily want to pick the inventory ID description. We maybe want to pick the line description. So just keep that in mind when you're building this out. The line description, the reason there's a difference there is, as an end user, as a salesperson, I may type in something a little different. So we may want that. That's the trans description. And this isn't necessary for being able to do our profitability by item category. Certainly not. But it's nice to be able to build this data so that we can validate it and make sure it's correct before we start running reports, consolidated reports or grouping reports. So we'll go down, we'll do another line. We'll pick our quantity, so our order quantity. But keep in mind, you have a lot of different quantities here. Again, as we talked about before, what do we want? We want the quantity that was ordered, or do we want to use maybe a different quantity that maybe was shipped or something? So that's up to you. You can use quantity on shipments, and that gives you more of the real value. As I said before, you can also use invoices. But let's pick the open quantity. And again, we'll give this a column name. We'll give this a name too. Now we want the unit price. We'll put that in there. We'd love to get the extended price, and I believe that's what this is. So let's select that. Let's take a look at our sales order again, and I think, yeah, this was curry unit price. So let's change that. We'll go back. The reason for that is in case you do any different currencies, the system will be able to pull the currency off the screen. So there's a fine line between which field to use. You'll have to validate that, and or you could ask a question and we could certainly help you out. So here's our unit cost. And here's our extended cost. Essentially, extended means the quantity times the unit price, but Acumatica is doing it for you. Now, the next thing we want to know is what our margin is on this. Now, you could search and see if you could find it, but it doesn't exist. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is Acumatica, and we've done a lot of videos on this. Acumatica has an analysis generic inquiry that will do a lot of this work. The goal here is to show you how to produce it yourself. So the next thing we want to do is get this margin. How much do we make on this? And how do we want to know that? We probably want to know it at the extended level. The unit price doesn't really mean much to us. So what we can do is click the pencil here. And this gives us a formula editor. So the first thing we want to do is add a field here. So we want to say, essentially, our extended price, so Curry extended price minus extended cost. And you can click validate on this. The validation is passed, and you can click OK. And then probably we want to give this a column name, otherwise it's not really going to make sense. Let's say margin. So now let's start by viewing this. Now Acumatica gives you a view button here. Of course, you can jump right to it. There's also a preview panel on the right-hand side that was added several versions ago. So let's click that, and let's make this a little bit smaller so we can see what's going on. So if we scroll over to the right, and we'll make this a little bit bigger. We'll make this column bigger, so this way we can see all the numbers. You can see what we have here is a quantity, a unit price. We have an extended price, so this times that. There's a cost, and then of course an extended cost. And then we have a margin. Now, the way this looks, it's not great, right? It doesn't have very nice formatting. So if we collapse that and go back here, you notice this column schema field. This allows you to format it based on some known field. So for example, quantity, we can easily just pick the quantity field. Any one of the quantities, open quantity, closed quantity. For the unit price, we can pick something as well. Any kind of price will work. But I think this is already formatted. And then there's no reason we can't extend this across the board on every line item. So let's save it. That one didn't get saved. Let's save it. And then let's rerun it, or we'll expand our side panel here. And now these numbers look a little bit better. You notice we have 2 digits here. The quantity itself in Acumatica on the company profile, we're asking it to show 4 decimal places. That's why you're seeing 4 there. So that's fine. That would automatically be whatever your preferences are. But now at least the margin, that formula, is showing more correctly. But so now we have the pricing, we have the margin. So again, how much money are we making? What we don't see is the item class. See that there. So that's missing. And if we were to look for it, you're not going to find it. It doesn't exist. Equipment item class is for, I believe, our services module, but certainly not the item class. So how do we get it? So the way you can get stuff like that is if you go back to your tables. Acumatica allows you to add additional tables. And you can add those tables and make relations to them. So you add the table relation, you can go in here and do an inner join, a cross join. This is all documented very well out on the internet on what these joins do. But if we go back to tables, we need to get some information about the item. And we know that the sales order line doesn't have item category information. It has the item, but it doesn't know it. So what does know it? Well, the item knows it. The inventory ID knows it. So if we click on this and click Add Related Tables, or just highlight the row and then click Add Related Tables, Acumatica helps you, it cheats for you to show you any related tables, any tables that are related or could be joined. So what we're looking for here is inventory, our stock item. And we could find it by searching here. We could scroll down and look through every single one. Notice Acumatica says, okay, well, this is the table and it's linked to field's inventory ID. Well, we did see inventory ID in the SO line table. So that's why it's linked. And you also see linked from. So linked to is the inventory item table. Linked from is the SO line table inventory ID. If we highlight this and click select related, Acumatica will also put together the join for you. And if we add this, we not only get the table name, but if we go over to relations, you'll notice Acumatica put the relationship there. Now, the first thing in doing this, and sometimes it's a troubleshooting step, right? You need to know, where is the item class? Where do I find it from? And you can go over here to results grid. You can now add a new column. And you now have inventory item ID. And you can search for class, and we do have item class here. And that works great. We can add the item class. We can also add the item class description. Because the item class description seems to come in and be published with this inventory item table. Having said that, there may be fields that you need from the item class table. So if we went back to tables, and once again we hit this button, and we look for a class, you can see that there's the item class table, and there's a whole new set of columns that we can add to our inquiry screen. We don't need to do that because I think the class and the description are fine for this exercise. But that's how you know. The other thing is, before we move on, is if you click on any one of these tables, notice they're hyperlinks. And when you click on them, Acumatica opens up a schema browser. We have this in another video. We go into it in more detail. But the schema browser is really great for developers or database designers that want to know this information firsthand. But when we're looking at the sales order line, it shows all of the fields in the sales order line. And if you scroll down even further or click on these categories up here, you can find the incoming references, right? So the incoming references from other tables, or the outgoing references going out to other tables. So you can see it both directions. Okay, so under results grid, we have the item class and the item class ID description. We have both there. And we can add those. You could say class, or you could say category. And now we have a decent amount of data. Let's take a look at our preview page. And we can see sales history. And if we scroll over to the right, we can see also the category now, the class, and the category's description. The only thing I'd like to see here is maybe a date. It'd be nice to know when these things happen, maybe even a sales order number. So let's go back and let's add that. So we'll click on this, we'll pull that from the SO line, and we'll pick the order number. And then we'll add date. So there's many different dates at the line, but we're going to pull the order date. And let's save that. And we'll go and expand this again. Now, how you want this to look is, of course, totally up to you, where you want these columns to default. Of course, end users could always move columns around, but when users, if you express this to users, want to see it for the first time, you may decide that you want, for example, the date. You could just push this up here. Maybe you want the date up at the top and perhaps the order number at the top as well. So you can do that, save it, and when you go back, you'll see that for me, it didn't really change. But if I go here and I reset to default, it now borrows the setup from the actual generic inquiry. Okay, so now we have some decent data. Let's take a look at it in a bigger screen. Our sales order history, everything's great. It's coming out of here, sales order history in the sitemap. And we have all this information, but how do we categorize this by item class? So the way we want to do that is to create a pivot table. Now, when we create our pivot table, the first consideration we might have is, well, where do we want to get the data from? In other words, is there any filters that we'd like to do? Maybe we want to do it on a yearly basis, but maybe we want to say, only show me the last year, only show me the last couple of years. So to do that, we can go back to our generic inquiry and we can go into, for example, conditions and create a condition if we want to. We can build that in, or we could let the end user create a filter here themselves. But the other thing that we'd like to do is, I'd like to put this in date order. So if I go to sort order, we can add a field here. And we could put it in date order, but order number probably is fine too. Order number, and we'll say descending. That'll show us the most recent ones at the top of the screen. So if we go back and we refresh this page, we now see that the orders are in order number history. Now, if you have any kind of order numbering, you've changed the prefix and all that, you may want to go back to date. Looks like I have some orders with different dates on it, so that's why it's not going completely sequential. Okay, so now in order to summarize this, and again, I didn't put any conditions, I'm showing every order in the system, I can go in and create a pivot table. So we can save as a pivot. So we want to give it a name. So we'll call it margin by item class by year. And we could share it so other people can see it. Keep in mind that we created this inquiry screen, we added it to the menu, we added it to the sitemap. That is now something that you can put security on. So if you go over to your roles, you could do access by roles or access by screen. And you could find the screen and then decide which roles have it, or vice versa, find the role and add it to there. So because we created this, this is now a new security. So what we want is a row and a column to divide this information up. Now, it's up to us. If we have a lot of different item classes, then we probably want the rows to be there. Normally, the more records, rows, you could fit a lot more rows than you could fit columns, generally. Because rows are only so high, columns are pretty wide. So let's go in and let's put in our class description on a row. That's going to be our row. We drag and drop it. And we'll put our date as our column. And we'll take our margin as the value that we want to see based on how these two intersect. Now, we don't want to see all of the dates. So if we highlight this, notice you have a property selector here that's based on all of these different values. In this case, it's just this value. We can round to the year. So that's good. Set the format, the width, and all that. And then for the margin, we could decide, well, we want to show the number here. Certainly we want to add it up. We don't want to see the average. But you can make changes here. There's different options about how you want to see it. So then we click this button again, and it'll put all the data together. This is part of why you want to do maybe some filter, because if you're going to go back 5-10 years, and you have a lot of history, then it's going to take a long time for that to come up. So if we make this a little bit bigger, just so we can see our item class nicely, now you can see the amount of profit we've made on all of these different categories. The end user can. And each user, if they have the rights, they can click on those areas. So 2019, 3.4 million, and they can drill in and actually see those records. Now, if I go back also, and I make a change, maybe I don't want to see the numbers. I can go in, highlight margin, and say, well, I want to show the value as a percentage of the column. So if we click on that, now what you see is for each column, we're summing up to 100%. So that tells us for 2013, it looks like our lifts made the most profit. And for 2021, it looks like our packaged foods made the most profit. So you can see that way. You can click on these columns too, by the way, and sort to see what's what, who made the most margin, who made the most profit. So you can do all that. And then on the flip side, what we can do is go in here and say, well, you know what? In this case, I want to see percentage of the roto. And if I change that, I now get my percentages throughout the years. And I can see what year did I make the most money for these different item categories. So you have those options there. Additionally, you could do a percentage of the grand total, which means just find out which made the most money in what year. In some cases, that might be necessary. In some cases, it just might not make sense. But that's it. So that's how do I do profitability by item class. Of course, you can generate a form-based report. We don't show that in this video. You could certainly do that. So now the last thing we might do, I'm going to change this back to just the number. And I want to put this on my dashboard. So if I go back down to dashboards, and maybe I look at Sales Manager, keep in mind that you need to make sure that this is shared to do the next step. But I'm going to go to the Sales Manager, and I'm going to hit Design. I'll add a new widget. I'm going to make it a pivot table, because that's what we did, a pivot. We'll look for sales order history. And we could see this is the one, sales order history, that we created. And we could decide if we want to use some sort of shared filter as well. But we don't really have any filters on it, so that's okay. And then under pivot table, Acumatica will look through and see what pivot table or tables you've created in that inquiry. And it'll show them. And once again, we could say margin by item, class, and year. It might be better than by and by. So click finish here. So we have a lot of data here. And you may decide, well, I think I need a bigger area to do this. Now keep in mind, your dashboards have a layout to them. This is a multi-column layout. You may decide to change this or maybe replace this and put it up top. So if we do that, we now have it up here at the top so we could see more columns. And now when we click the design button, we have this bigger area that we can see more columns. Certainly you can change this so you can see more rows, but there's a scroll bar here to get down to it. And if you want to see any of the individual data, again, you can drill in, and Acumatica will bring you to that sales order history inquiry screen with the drill down that you clicked on from the dashboard. So that's it. That's margin by item category. And we happen to throw in the year. But that's a good way to see your profitability by item category. If you have any questions about this or anything else Acumatica, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for watching and subscribing to our YouTube channel, and have a great day.